Okay, today we have the Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So the Supreme Court has rejected the Texas-led effort to invalidate the election results in 4 states, including yours, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Wisconsin. So first off, what's your reaction to the decision?
Well, obviously, I'm grateful that the Supreme Court ruled in a manner that doesn't disenfranchise the 5.5 million people who voted in my state, and really the 10 million people who live in the state of Michigan will be properly represented in the Electoral College. But honestly, I'm more sad than I am relieved, because I can't believe that we even got to a place in our country where another state would dare try to undermine the election in another state. And I can't believe that there were, 18 other attorneys general that supported that effort, and some 128 members of Congress, not to mention the 15 state reps here in Michigan that supported the effort to overturn the election of our own constituents, our own state residents. I'm baffled by it. I'm saddened by it, but I'm really hoping that the country can move on at this point.
I got to ask, what do you think Texas would say if you, as Attorney General of Michigan, tried to invalidate Texas's election results?
Yeah, I was looking at the statement by Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas last night, and he talked about, well, if only Michigan would have properly followed state law, federal law, and the Constitution, we wouldn't have had to done that. And I thought to myself, firstly, every court that where this has been challenged in Michigan, whether it was state courts or federal courts, whether these were judges that were appointed by Democrats or Republicans, each and every one of them upheld how Michigan handled their elections. But secondly, I take issue with a lot of things that Texas did during the course of the election, especially leading up to it. It was massive voter suppression on an enormous scale, especially the limiting of drop boxes to 1 per county, even for Harris County that had over 4 million residents. And we didn't do things right in Michigan. I mean, it's not just that is so offensive on every level, but I also want to say I couldn't even imagine for other states. I mean, for our state, which is a swing state, and 2016 went for Trump, and now 2020 went for Biden. Could you imagine if next time we were to elect a Republican for the office of president, if Massachusetts or California or New York said, we don't like the way you voted, so now we're going to come in and try to overturn that election? I mean, what kind of precedent would we be setting in the United States of America, and what would be left of democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think if Michigan were to ever intervene in Texas's election results, Ted Cruz would be on his soapbox so fast that the earth would fall off of its axis. So Trump's legal team, though, through all of their respective bouts of coronavirus, have already come out and said that they plan to bring these issues to each state's respective district courts where they'll have standing. How do you anticipate that these cases are going to play out?
But all the claims that were made have already been made in our district courts. Right. So even if they were granted standing, it's already been decided. And also, it's not just that each and every one of the claims that were made in the Supreme Court filing were already made in our district courts, but it's too late. And that was one of our arguments, was latches. It's too late to bring these claims. In fact, one of the claims that was, again, already went all the way through our court system involved the fact that our Secretary of State had sent out absentee voter applications, not ballots, as has been suggested erroneously many times, but applications, simply because in 2018, we passed no reason absentee ballot voting. And she was sending out these applications for any already registered voters who wanted to take advantage, especially during the pandemic, of their newfound constitutional right to vote absentee. So we were, the Secretary of the State was sued for that. We defended her, and we already won on that matter. And so now, and that happened well before the election, and it was not challenged by Texas. So why would they challenge that now when it occurred, and again, we already successfully defended it, they didn't sue then. So why would they be suing now? What gives
Yeah.
them the right to do that? And especially, you don't get to wait and see if Michigan votes for your candidate or not. And then when Michigan decides otherwise, say, well, now I'm going to sue you because I don't like what you did months ago.
Right. Right. But, and by the way, if you bring a case that's basically identical to a case that you previously brought, is there anything blocking you from being able to do that?
Oh, well, I think that essentially the court that it's filed in could say this matter has already been decided, and issue an opinion of that nature. And then, of course, I think it would be in any of the appellate courts, they would immediately say, we're not going to accept this. But I also think in that case, I would absolutely ask for sanctions and attorney's fees and court costs in the event they did that.
Yeah, and I do want to get to that point shortly, but I just want to touch on one more issue here, and that is most of what I do through my videos and the podcast is debunk bad faith talking points. So I want to go over some of the purported claims of fraud that we've heard, and we could do something of a lightning round here. So were ballots cast from dead voters in Michigan?
No, absolutely, they were not. They were cast. There are some votes that were cast by people who were alive but then died between the time period of them casting the vote and it being received. But all of those votes did not count because there's a process that the Secretary of State has in place to identify anybody who's died. And that basically comes from all the medical examiners around the state and any of the lists of people who have passed away. So those people voted, they were alive. Many of them, sadly, probably died of COVID because we've had so many deaths in the interim period, and then their votes were discarded. So that is factually inaccurate.
Were batches of ballots counted 8 to 10 times?
Absolutely not.
Has there been any type of an audit since the initial election?
There is going to be an audit. It's been announced by our secretary, and there is some sort of audit that is required under law, irrespective, but it happens after certification, not before certification, which is what many people were asking for. But my understanding is that the Secretary of State has decided to expand the audit, and she specifically wants to focus in on any of the areas where these claims were made. Even though they've been widely debunked, she's going to make certain that everybody knows exactly what happened. So for historical purposes, or at the request of the legislature in Michigan, or anybody who's curious, they can see exactly what happened in those areas.
And I'm sure when the audit shows up the same number of votes that were counted originally, that will also lend itself to debunking the claim that the batches were counted 8 to 10 times. Were observers prevented from watching ballot counting at the TCF Center?
No, that's not true at all. There were some numbers that were put in terms of limits because of COVID restrictions, but there were, I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it was over 100 Republican observers and poll watchers that were in there. But the problem was you had our state GOP chairwoman who sent out something saying, flood the TCF Center. And then you had hundreds and hundreds of people that were trying to, who were being disruptive and were trying to break into the room. And we already had the COVID restrictions to begin with. So you couldn't have an unlimited number of people in there. And also they're being very disruptive. So that's not true at all. And in fact, each and every media outlet that was present, and there were dozens of them, have refuted that. And they have video footage of that.
Is there any evidence that Dominion Voting Systems or any other voting systems vendor is compromised?
None whatsoever. And in fact, the example we keep hearing over and over again in Antrim County, firstly, that involves a Trump supporting Republican clerk who conceded that it was human error. She made an error. She didn't properly upload some of the software. And as a result, that's why there was an error, but they caught it right away. They had caught it within 24 hours. And that's what the canvassing process is about. She caught the error herself, which was then, again, it would have been caught by the the locals, then the clerks at the county level, and then at the state canvass level. I mean, there's multiple layers of review. And within 24 hours, they knew that there was a mistake and they fixed it.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, what's the likelihood that Hugo Chavez interfered in your race, in your state? I mean, I know that you can't speak on what he did in Georgia, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania.
Well, given that he's dead, it's hard for me to predict what he's done from beyond the grave. I will tell you, sometimes I'm doing my laundry and I'm missing socks, and I wonder, did Hugo Chavez somehow play a role in my missing socks?
Or the CIA, the DOJ, Brad Raffensperger. Yeah, there's a whole
Yes,
long
any of
list
those
of,
things, right?
yeah.
I suppose. No, but I mean, we're laughing because of the ludicrous nature of these allegations. But then you remember that these were attorneys representing the President of the United States
Yeah.
that went into state and federal courts and actually made these arguments. And more than being entertained, I think we should be a little bit sad. And I will say this, of course, as I was watching our House Oversight Committee, have the preposterous hearing on the election and have Rudy Giuliani, COVID and all, come in and present his witnesses. As I was watching it, I actually leaned over to my wife and I said, you know what, this would make an excellent Saturday Night Live skit. And then sure enough, it turns up, it is the cold opening for SNL. And so there was part of me that was like, I was right. Other people do find this to be hilarious. But then there was part of me that thought, what a mockery that our state house has now such a joke, so ridiculous in nature that it can actually be parodied on a national sketch show. What other state legislature have you ever seen on SNL? And it made me sad more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And, time will tell if that's gonna be anything of a wake up call. But I actually do want to build on what you were just saying. The people who signed on to the lawsuits, from around the country in the 18 different states, the 126 Republican lawmakers, they swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Is there a world where publicly or in court, working to undermine the law that they swore to uphold, undermine the Constitution that they swore to protect, is a breach of their oath of office and that they should be subject to removal?
Well, I do think it's a breach of their oath of office. They, as you indicated, they upheld to support, to defend, and uphold the Constitution of their own states and also of the United States of America. I guess in the words of Thomas Jefferson, they perverted the principle upon which our democracy was founded and imperiled its very existence. I truly believe that to be the case. I think that the way to hold them accountable will have to be at the ballot box. I just don't see a scenario where, people are prosecuted for that or they lose their offices. I think that will be a matter for their constituents to decide whether or not they ought to retain those offices when they are up the next time. And certainly if I was running against any of them, and I might be, who knows who's going to run against me in 2022, I would make that argument that to subvert the Constitution in the manner in which they did that, to undermine the very foundation of our democracy, is a despicable act, and it's unworthy and beneath the dignity of their offices. But I don't see any other remedy other than ensuring that they are never again elected into the offices in which they serve.
Yeah. So in your opinion, are the deluge of lawsuits actually about winning this litigation in court, or just continuing to perpetuate a disinformation campaign surrounding election fraud?
I think it's the latter. I do think that anyone who is a serious attorney knows that they don't stand a chance with these lawsuits. These claims are ludicrous. They're factually inaccurate. Let's start with that. They're also ridiculous legal claims that they're making. So it's both of those. So I have to believe that most of this is an effort to appease the emperor so that he doesn't then come out against whoever these individuals are that are bringing those claims, or to endear dear leader to them. I mean, I can't think of any other legitimate legal premise behind it, but it's so sad. And this is why I think that, at least on the legal side, there have to be repercussions for these attorneys, because they really are violating the rules of professional conduct. When you submit an affidavit and you know that it is a factual misrepresentation, there should be penalties. And I think that we can't allow this to continue and say, well, but it's on behalf of the president, so it's okay. When if it was on behalf of just a regular private person, there would be sanctions involved. And literally you would have a situation where, at least in Michigan, there would be a complaint and it would go to the Attorney Grievance Commission, and that person could be disciplined. They could even lose their law license. It shouldn't be any different just because you're representing the president of the United States.
Right. And by the way, these people have gone into court presenting their affidavits, a lot of which they admitted to the judge were spam. And so, and the same process that they used to get the spam affidavits were the process that they used to get the affidavits that they then presented to the court. So, they've proved that the process that they used was fundamentally flawed. But you can't go into court and knowingly lie to a judge. So I mean, like you said, I mean, aren't these people subject to discipline and losing their law license for going in and saying, making these claims that there was, non-existent fraud and any other, basically bogus claims that they brought forward?
I think they should be. I think we should all be held to that standard. And that's why these lawsuits on behalf of the president have so deeply undermined yet another institution, which is our legal system. There are so many other areas, of course, where we've seen that in terms of our intelligence and defense administration in the country, where people have no longer, they don't have faith in the Department of Justice, they don't have faith in the FBI, CIA. They don't have faith in our various, in our State Department or many of our federal agencies. And now they don't have faith in our court system either. And it's just, that's how much Donald Trump has done to erode confidence in the institutions which which are the basis of everything we have in the United States of America. And I can't believe how much damage he's done just in 4 years' time.
Yeah. Well, what we're seeing now is these Republicans around the country using these fake fraud claims to then enact real voter suppression. So in Georgia specifically, Republicans are already moving to require voter ID for mail ballots, to get rid of no excuse mail voting, to ban drop boxes, to make it easier to reject mail ballots. If this happens in Michigan, I know that you don't have a say from the legislative side, but from the legal side, A, do you anticipate this? And B, is there anything you can do to stop it?
Well, fortunately, I don't have to worry about that because our governor's name is Gretchen Whitmer, and she's got a veto pen, and she's not afraid to use it. So that's not going to happen in the next couple of years, even though we have a Republican legislature that I think would be happy to enact those voter suppression reforms. And in fact, they were very resistant to some of the things that would have made this much easier. So for instance, one of the things that even the Speaker of the House, who's a very, very big Trump supporter, he indicated they should have allowed the ballots to be counted early, just the same way they do in Florida and Ohio. Now, you don't hear the Republicans saying there was voter fraud, widespread voter fraud in Ohio or Florida, simply because Trump won there. So, of course, everything must have happened perfectly and according to plan, just because he was the winner. But that's the kind of thing where you wouldn't have to, so many of these other issues that we had in Michigan were simply because the legislature refused to enact these very, very simple changes to process. So, I'm hoping they'll do that, but in terms of them making it more difficult to vote, at least for the next couple of years, that can't happen. Fortunately, I feel bad in the states where we do see it happening, because, if you really care about democracy, then you want as many people as possible to participate. It's only, I guess, if you're in the minority that you need to disenfranchise voters to stay in power.
And unfortunately, that's not even just a theoretical, supposition. That's we're seeing that on a daily basis play out. The last question I want to ask, though, is, we did see, speaking of Governor Whitmer, we saw this heinous kidnapping plot against her thwarted. At my last count, I believe that there were 14 people who were arrested and charged. Can you give the latest on that case and the message that you're looking to send?
Right. Well, so 8 of those cases are state cases that are being handled by my office. The other 6 are being handled by the federal authorities in the Western District of Michigan, the U.S. Attorney there. The cases are moving forward. Unfortunately, most, if not all, I think, of the state defendants are out on bond. The judges reduced their bonds significantly, and that is a bit of a concern, I would say. But those cases are moving forward to preliminary exams, and then later, hopefully, they're bound over and scheduled for trial. Everything is much, much, much slower in the criminal justice system because of COVID. Court is being held mostly remotely. It's very hard, by the way, to cross-examine witnesses and so forth when you're doing it over Zoom. But certainly, it's impossible to have a jury trial. You have to have a jury trial in person. So all of our cases are going much slower than we would like them to. And I look forward to widespread vaccination being the cure to that and being able to move forward more quickly with all of our cases.
Yeah. All right. Well, Attorney General Nessel, thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.